Imagine standing in a darkened laboratory in the year 1895. The only sound is the low electric hum of a glass tube wrapped in black cardboard. A physicist named Wilhelm Röntgen is alone, frustrated, chasing a mystery he cannot yet name. He is not trying to change medicine. He is not trying to save lives. He is not even trying to see through human flesh. He is simply trying to understand whether invisible electrons can pass through glass. And then, in the corner of that dark room, something glows that should not glow. Something shimmers on a chemically coated screen nearly a meter away, a screen Röntgen had not even set up yet for the experiment he was about to run. He passes the charge through the tube again. The shimmer returns. And in that quiet electric instant, without planning it, without predicting it, without even fully understanding it, Wilhelm Röntgen accidentally discovers one of the most powerful tools in the history of human civilization. He calls it the X-ray. X, because in mathematics, X means the unknown, and the unknown is exactly what it is. What happens next will shatter every assumption about the human body. It will spark a scientific revolution, give birth to modern medicine, kill the very people who pioneer it, and raise questions that scientists are still answering today. The X-ray is not just a medical tool, it is a ghost story, a thriller, and a triumph all rolled into one accidental flash of invisible light. To understand how something so profound could have been discovered by accident, you have to understand the world Röntgen was living in. The 1890s were a time of breathless scientific momentum. Physicists across Europe were obsessed with cathode rays, mysterious streams of electrons that shot through vacuum tubes when electricity was applied. Scientists like Heinrich Hertz, Philip Lenard, and William Crookes had been playing with these glowing tubes for decades. They were hot, they were spectacular, and they flickered with the eerie beauty of science at the edge of the unknown. What no one realized, and what makes this accident so extraordinary, is that several of these scientists had already produced X-rays in their laboratories without ever knowing it. They had simply missed the shimmer on a screen. Röntgen did not miss it, and the reason he did not miss it, according to Anna Katharina Kettger, deputy director of the German Röntgen Museum, is that he was exactly the kind of scientist who investigated rather than assumed. When a reporter later asked Röntgen what he thought when he saw the strange glow, he gave one of the most remarkable answers in the history of science. "I did not think," he said, "I investigated." For the next 7 weeks, he did not leave his laboratory. He told no one. He ate meals in the lab. He slept only briefly. He was not operating on instinct alone. He was operating on scientific obsession. He moved the glowing screen further and further from the tube, and it still lit up. He placed his hand in front of the beam and saw not flesh, but bone. He tried books, papers, aluminum, wood. The ray passed through almost all of it, leaving only the densest materials to cast a shadow. Lead, he discovered, could stop it entirely. And then came the image that would shock the world. On December 22, 1895, Röntgen called his wife, Anna Bertha Ludwig, into his laboratory and asked her to hold her hand still over a photographic plate. He directed the beam at her hand for 15 minutes. When the plate was developed, Anna Bertha stared at a ghostly skeletal image of her own hand, her wedding ring floating like a halo around bones she had never seen before, bones that were her own. She did not react with wonder, she reacted with horror. Looking at that image, she reportedly said, "I have seen my death." It was the first X-ray photograph of a human being ever taken, and she was right to feel what she felt, because something about the X-ray would, in the decades to come, prove fatal to many of those who wielded it. By New Year's Day 1896, Röntgen sent 90 envelopes to physicists across Europe. 12 of those envelopes contained photographs, including the haunting image of his wife's hand. The reaction was unlike anything science had ever seen.
Biographer Otto Glaser wrote that rarely in the history of science has information concerning a new discovery been disseminated so rapidly or made such a deep impression upon the general public. Röntgen, a deeply private man who disliked publicity, suddenly found himself famous around the world. He was given an honorary medical degree. Kaiser Wilhelm II summoned him for a personal demonstration, and in 1901 he became the very first person ever awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. But while Röntgen was being celebrated, a darker story was quietly beginning. In the months following the discovery, X-ray machines began proliferating with breathtaking speed and almost no regulation. Within a single year, doctors in Europe and the United States were using them to locate bullets, fractures, kidney stones, and swallowed objects, and the public was fascinated in a way that bordered on mania. Street photographers set up X-ray booths and charged passers-by to see images of their own bones. Shoe merchants, remarkably, installed X-ray machines in their stores to help customers see whether their shoes fit properly, allowing children to stand over an active beam while the salesman watched their toe bones wiggle. This was considered not just acceptable, but modern. No one wore protective equipment, no one measured dosage, no one even knew there was a dosage to measure. The very concept of radiation danger did not yet exist. When you're exposed to X-ray radiation, what happens inside your body is both invisible and devastating at the cellular level. The rays are a form of electromagnetic energy, but unlike visible light, their wavelengths are roughly 1,000 times shorter, which is precisely what allows them to pass through soft tissue. When an X-ray beam strikes your body, it travels through skin and muscle with almost no resistance. But when it strikes something denser, bone, metal, or tumor, it slows and stops, casting a shadow on the imaging surface behind. The result is that extraordinary silhouette we now take for granted on every medical scan. The danger comes from what happens in the tissue the ray does pass through. X-ray photons carry enough energy to knock electrons out of atoms, a process called ionization. These ionized atoms can damage the molecular structure of DNA, the very code that tells your cells how to grow, replicate, and survive. Most of the time, your body's repair mechanisms catch these errors and correct them, but not always. When the damage escapes correction, the result can be a mutation, a cell that multiplies incorrectly, aggressively, uncontrollably, cancer. In the early years, the pioneers of radiology had no idea this was happening. They worked with machines that emitted massive, uncontrolled doses. They held photographic plates in their bare hands. They tested equipment by placing their fingers in the beam. A 1986 experiment by Nikola Tesla, who deliberately exposed his fingers to X-rays and noted the resulting burns, was considered a curiosity rather than a warning. And the consequences came slowly, silently, invisibly. Emil Grubbe of Chicago, often credited as the first physician to use radiation to treat cancer in 1896, would eventually die of cancer himself, a bitter irony that was not lost on the medical community. Early radiologists developed skin cancers on their hands. They lost fingers to radiation burns. They developed cataracts, then leukemia, then they simply died. A few years after the discovery, a pattern emerged that no one could ignore. The people closest to X-ray machines were dying of diseases that had no other obvious cause. The story of Marie Curie stands perhaps as the most iconic and haunting chapter in the history of radiation exposure. Though Curie was not the discoverer of X-rays, her work was inseparable from their legacy. She carried tubes of radioactive material in her coat pockets. She stored radium in her desk drawer, marveling at the pale blue-green glow it emitted in the darkness. During World War I, she organized a fleet of mobile X-ray units she called Petite Curies, Little Curies, which she drove to the front lines herself to help surgeons locate bullets and shrapnel on wounded soldiers. The tubes on those machines were unshielded. Curie absorbed enormous doses of radiation over years and decades. Both she and her husband, Pierre, developed what would now be recognized as early symptoms of radiation sickness: exhaustion, inflamed hands, raw fingers. By the end of her life, her eyesight was failing, her bones were brittle, and the radiation burns on her fingers had become unbearable. She died on July 4, 1934, of aplastic anemia, a disease in which the bone marrow simply stops producing blood cells, likely the result of decades of radiation exposure. Her notebooks to this day are stored in lead-lined boxes. Visitors who wish to read them must sign a liability waiver. Her daughter, Irene Curie-Joly, followed her mother into nuclear research and died of leukemia in 1956, almost certainly from the same invisible enemy. The Curie family had given everything to science, and science, without meaning to, had taken everything back. What makes the X-ray such a
Profound and layered story is not just its danger, but the extraordinary revolution it ignited despite, or perhaps because of, the darkness at its edges. Röntgen's discovery in 1895 directly inspired Henri Becquerel to investigate uranium rays just a year later, which in turn led Marie Curie to discover radioactivity itself. The British discovery of the electron in 1897 was also connected to X-ray research, and those discoveries laid the foundation for Albert Einstein's landmark work on the photoelectric effect. One accident in a darkened German laboratory had set off a chain reaction in physics that would ultimately reshape the entire modern world. By the 1970s, a new technological era was born directly from X-ray science: the CT scanner, or computed tomography. Where a standard X-ray produces a single flat shadow, a CT scanner rotates around the body, firing hundreds of X-ray beams from different angles and using a computer to reconstruct them into a three-dimensional image of breathtaking detail. The inventors of the CT scanner were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1979. Today, over 80 million CT scans are performed in the United States alone every single year. And while a standard chest X-ray delivers a radiation dose of just 0.1 millisieverts, roughly the equivalent of 10 days of natural background radiation, a single CT scan of the chest can deliver 70 times that amount. It is the same power, amplified and refined, still carrying within it that original double edge of revelation and risk. Scientists today are still wrestling with questions that Röntgen's mistake first raised. How much radiation exposure is too much? At what dose does the benefit of diagnosis stop outweighing the risk of future cancer? A 2013 Australian study of more than 680,000 people who had CT scans as children found that for every 10,000 young people scanned, 45 would develop cancer in the next decade, compared to 39 in an unscanned group. A 2024 NIH-backed study led by Dr. Rebecca Smith-Bintman at UCSF found that radiation from current CT imaging could contribute to future cancer cases at a rate comparable to known risk factors like alcohol and excess body weight. These are not numbers meant to frighten patients away from necessary scans. They are numbers that demand respect for the power of the tool. The benefit of catching a tumor early, of locating internal bleeding, of guiding a surgeon's hand. These benefits dwarf the statistical risk in almost every individual case, but they are a reminder that even our most beautiful instruments carry a shadow. There is a question that still haunts physicists and historians alike. How many scientists before Röntgen had already produced X-rays without realizing it? The answer, it seems, is several. Cathode ray experiments in the laboratories of Crookes, Hertz, and Leonard had almost certainly generated X-rays as a byproduct. Some researchers had noticed unexplained fogging on nearby photographic plates and thrown the plates away, assuming they were defective.
In one telling account, Röntgen himself had placed a book on a photographic plate with an experimental electric tube, and later found the outline of a key that had been hidden between the pages of the book, a key made visible by rays he had not yet named. The discovery of the X-ray was not a single moment of inspiration. It was the collision of curiosity, preparation, and a willingness to stop and ask why something that should not glow was glowing. That is the deepest truth of this beautiful mistake. Röntgen did not invent X-rays. They had been there all along, passing silently through matter, through bone, through history. He simply became the first person to notice, to stop, to investigate, and to refuse to look away. Today, on November 8th each year, the world celebrates World Radiography Day in honor of the evening in 1895 when a faint shimmer changed everything. There are now 55 postage stamps from 40 countries bearing Röntgen's image. A mountain peak in Antarctica and a minor planet in our solar system are named in his honor. The element Röntgenium on the periodic table carries his name, and his original laboratory in Würzburg, Germany, is preserved as a memorial, the very room where the accident happened, the bench still in place, the silence still somehow electric. Wilhelm Röntgen, a modest man who refused to patent his discovery and gave away the Nobel Prize money to science, died in 1923 at the age of 77. He had lived long enough to see the X-ray transform surgery, diagnose tuberculosis at scale, guide World War I medics, and begin to unmask cancers that otherwise would have stayed hidden until it was too late. He was spared the worst of radiation's consequences, perhaps because in the early days, before machines grew powerful, the doses were relatively low. Perhaps he was simply fortunate. We will never fully know because he ordered all of his laboratory notes destroyed upon his death. That act, burning the very records that might have told us the full story, is its own haunting coda to the tale. The man who made the invisible visible chose, in the end, to make his process invisible again. And so we are left with a mystery inside a miracle, an accident that built modern medicine, a glow that revealed bones and ignited a century of discovery, a tool that saves millions of lives every year and still carries, threaded through every beam, the whisper of a risk that no dose of wonder can entirely dissolve. The X-ray began as a mistake made in the dark, and in the dark, somehow, it still glows.